Good evening to the Committee of the Whole for the March 24-21 meeting. The first item in the agenda is call to order. The Pledge of Allegiance. So please stand up.
Stand up?
Yes, if you want. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So next in our agenda is roll call. Who is going to take the roll call?
That would be me, Madam Chair.
Yeah, Mark. Okay, thank you.
Arata Frada,
Here.
Clouder.
He's here.
Gerhardt,
Here.
Krause,
Here.
Maldonado,
Here.
Richardson,
Here.
Schroeder,
Here.
Strassman,
Here.
Udell.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. So next we move to the approval of the minutes. So I need a motion to approve the minutes from the February 24 meeting.
So move.
Second. Any question, discussion?
Can you just, you went a little fast for me. Who made the motion and who seconded?
Joe made the motion and Gabriella seconded.
Okay, we are gonna slow down, Mike. Okay, any question, discussion? No? Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes for February 24, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries. So next in our agenda is public appearances for non-agenda items. Do we have anyone in the chambers?
No, ma'am, no one in the chamber.
Okay, so next we move to the agenda items. And tonight we have two presentations. So thank you for being here tonight. And the first one is going to be done by the Bicycle Committee. Phil Groupie is going to take, he's going to introduce the members of the committee. He's going to be in charge of the first hour. And then in the second hour, we are going to talk about the findings of the Lake Barney Stormwater Management Study. So, okay, so Phil.
Thanks, Julia. So I'm the staff representative to the Bicycle Committee, also here with Mark Hamilton, the chair of the committee, and Andy Potts, one of the committee members, as well as a former alder. But before any of us go through the presentation, Joe Maldonado, as the alder representative to the committee, we asked him just to give a little bit of an introduction to this. So I'll hand it over to Joe first.
Sure. Thank you for the introduction. So I was asked to lead, and I graciously accepted. For me, this is personal. I love biking. I've been a bike commuter for years, haven't been able to do it for a few years, but I actually used to bike every day in the winter, even. And, one part of what made it easier for me to do was the amount of trails and paths that we have in the regional area, but also specifically in Fitchburg. So I think a lot of people make their decisions to come here based on, many factors, including quality of life. And one part of that quality of life is, how bikeable the city is, and we have a reputation for that. So I think it not only brings people here, it brings investment here as well. And it's also an issue of equity. So, one of the people who is really a biking champion in this community is Baltazar de Anda. He's the CEO of Latino Academy of Workforce Development. And one of the things he said was, when he first moved here, he was undocumented, so he couldn't get a driver's license. And one of the ways he got around was on a bike, and got back and forth there. It actually allowed him to be able to, live a healthier lifestyle and also have a way to get here. So if you go down the bike paths, particularly the Southwest Trail, you'll see, a lot of families walking down those paths and biking down those paths. And if you go a couple blocks from my house, you'll see the intersection of 3 major bike trails, the Cannonball, the Southwest, and the capital city right here in Fitchburg. So, you know, this is it's a quality of life issue, and it's definitely something I will always advocate for, whether I'm on the council or not. I want to give a shout out to the bicycle committee. They were formed, you know, several years ago when I was just a citizen. I was invited to join it, and you know, I'm proud to be a part of it as alder. I think they've, you know, done some tremendous work in just kind of systemically looking at how can Fitchburg be more bike friendly with our lanes, with our trails, with our policies, and where kind of strategically throughout our city we place things that would make this a more both bikeable and walkable community. I think that's really important to a lot of people, especially younger people. So without further ado, I'm gonna, you know, allow my counterparts on the bike committee to present. But, you know, just this isn't just sort of a one-off, you know, fun committee. It's a committee that actively works and gets things done, and is an investment in our city. So take it away, guys.
Great, thanks, Joe. And yeah, just because this is a relatively new committee, I think regardless of how many years you've been an alder, there's probably some aspects of it that may be relatively unfamiliar to you. So we just thought this would be a really good opportunity to introduce you to the committee, what it's been up to, what it's looking to accomplish. And Mark, do you want to take it away?
Sure, if you'll give me the screen. And since we are doing a Zoom presentation, as we flip slides, we're going to use the proverbial next. So just bear with us on that, please. So I'm going to start us off here. And first of all, I want to say good evening to everybody, all of our alders and the mayor and the city staff in the room. And I want to give a shout out back to Alder Maldonado, because since he joined the committee, he has been very supportive of us. And I appreciate the kind words he gave us to get us going. I'm going to introduce myself first as the chair of this committee. I've been in Fitchburg 29 years. The first week I moved here 29 years ago, I had friends put me on a bike to go to Paoli. And I became kind of hooked on biking after that. I've raised my family here. We've chosen to stay here because what we like within the city. Secondly, personally, on a personal note, my wife and I both bike. So it's very nice to be in the city or to go down to Madison or to go out to the country in a quick format. And it's dramatically changed. I worked at 29 and 40 years in healthcare administration, 26 years at UW Health in an executive capacity. In addition, I'm also the past president of the Chamber of Commerce Board, and I'm serving on the CETA committee in addition to the bike committee. So as I retired 2.5 years ago, I've got a lot of volunteer things going on within this city, and I think a lot of the city, and there's a lot of good people here. So I thank you for that opportunity to serve you. In addition, we have Phil Groupie, who is our sustainability specialist for the city, and he is our bike committee liaison. And we know he has other responsibilities, but he's truly doing a good job supporting us with all the moving parts. And then lastly, Andy Potts is also going to talk to you tonight, and he's a former alder, and he's the executive budget manager for the state of Wisconsin. So at any rate, Phil, if you could go to the next slide, we'll keep moving. So what are we going to talk about tonight? What we're going to cover, we're going to give a little introduction to the committee, going to give an overview of bicycling in Fitchburg, give you our priorities and goals. When I joined this group in 2018, we didn't have any goals. And I think that as Phil came on board, I worked with the committee to get goals and priorities set up, things that we could track. In addition, as Alder Maldonado said, we've done a lot of things over the course of 2020 and a lot of plans for 2021. And then lastly, we're going to talk to you about our needs at the end and how we stand as a bicycle-friendly community. I want to stress as we get to our needs at the end, if we're going to continue to grow bike friendliness in this city, there's going to need to be a small investment. And again, small, and that word is relative, and we're not going to go into that tonight, but we're going to have to make some investments to move ourselves forward. So next page, please, Phil. Who's our committee members? I've already talked about myself Andy Potts. We also have Angie Lucas, who is the Verona Athletic Department Natatorium Director. Joey Mikowski, who's a retired Fitchburg resident. Ellie Jen, who's a grad student. And then in addition to Phil and Alder Maldonado, we also have Angela Kinderman as one of our advisors from the Fitchburg Chamber Visitor and Business Bureau. In addition, I link back to the chamber since I'm still sitting on the chamber board for bicycle issues. I want to, before you leave this slide, I want to say the first 5 people up there are all volunteers. We're volunteering our time to the city, and other than us grabbing Phil to help us with things, we're donating our time for at no cost. So thank you. Next slide, please, Phil. So I'm not going to read this slide to you, but what I want to share with you is when the city in 2017 did the bike ped plan, one of the things that was identified in that plan was the formation of a bicycle committee. And it didn't really, I don't think, and if I'm wrong, I'll stand corrected, but I don't think that it really got going. I know Steve Arnold was mayor at the time. I don't think this really got going until Aaron stepped in as mayor. I got involved in 2018. But the goal is for us to encourage and promote bicycling and work with the city staff to enhance our network of bicycles and roads. And as Joe said, one thing we're starting to work more on down the road, improving equitable access. But we use this bike and ped plan as a guiding document. So that's where we came from and have what we're operating from. So next slide. So again, the why cycling, I think the key with this is health is one thing. It is good for you. We're going to get into the economy. It is $1.42 billion a year into the economy in the state of Wisconsin. So that's very important. And you'll hear later, we have some bicycle businesses in this town, like Saris, for example, the Fitchburg Cycle, and of course, race day events. As far as the environment, people are riding a bike is much better than using a gas car or other forms of moving around that have you burn fossil fuel. Bicycles give you choices in transportation. The next thing is about roads and traffic. Bicycles on paths will take traffic off bicycles on the roads and bicycle lanes are safer than riding on a road out there where there is no bike lane. And we're working with the city on every new road that's being constructed. The city's working to put in bike lanes or bike accommodations if there aren't bike lanes, as well as they look at speed limits and et cetera, et cetera. And then last, the quality of life. I can share with you, I have a friend that works for Trek, and their business was up 300% last year. Right now, there's trouble getting bike parts, and there's not a great selection of bikes in our stores in the city of Madison. So almost half of the country was on a bike last year if they had an opportunity to get out. So you can see this is something that's dramatically grown, and the people that support biking nationally don't see it going down because they think people have realized this is a great way to live. So next slide, Phil.
All right, I think we're gonna hand it over to Andy here for a little bit.
Okay, you're on, Andy.
So what is the status of cycling in Wisconsin? So in addition to being on the Fitchburg Bike Committee, I'm also the chair of the Governor's Bicycle Coordinating Council. I was actually just recently appointed as the chair by Governor Evers. One thing that we did recently is in 2019, we commissioned an Impact of Bicycling in Wisconsin report, and that found that consumer spending on cycling was about $1.42 billion per year. So that's looking at sort of the tourism impact of it, but as well as the impact of consumer spending within bike shops and bike accessories as well. Additionally, on the state front, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources puts out their SCORP, is what they call it, the Statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan. And it's a they do this plan once every 10 years, and it helps the department prioritize how they want to spend their dollars in terms of where to place the investments on state-owned property or where to acquire state property for things like trails or state parks. But one of the things that they do is they conduct a lot of background information and surveys as part of this. And some things that they found out is that bicycling is reported as one of the top 5 favorite outdoor activities by residents of the state. Looking at it, I think Mark mentioned this as well, that half of Wisconsin residents bicycled at some point within the past year. And that approximately 35% of people bike on a regular basis recreationally. Interestingly, that's actually higher than the number of people who hunt or engage in motorized trail-based activities, so things like snowmobiling or ATVing. So I think hunting and ATVing and snowmobiling oftentimes are kind of viewed as like the quintessential outdoor activities in Wisconsin. There's actually more people out biking than are doing those other activities. In addition, Wisconsin is home to several large manufacturers of bicycles. Trek Bikes in Waterloo is the second largest bike manufacturer in the world, and Pacific Cycles, which is based in Madison, actually just over the border from Fitchburg. I believe they're within the top 10 of bike manufacturers in the world as well. In addition, there are a number of activities and events that go on in the state. As part of the Impact of Bicycling report, we found that there were, in 2018, there were 150 events that were bicycle related throughout the state of Wisconsin. And while some of those are kind of local events, I'm actually wearing my, you probably can't see it, I've got my Fitchburg Festival speed shirt on. While some of them are kind of local events like that, there are others like the Truck World Cup, which is actually an international event that draws professional cyclists from around the world. It's featured on ESPN. It's actually quite a big deal. Likewise, Tour of America's Dairyland is another big multi-day road racing event that occurs in southeast Wisconsin. Again, week-long event, draws professional riders from all over the world to it. Next slide, please. What is the status of cycling in Fitchburg? So, as we mentioned, there are some large bike companies in Wisconsin, but we actually have some bike-centric organizations in Fitchburg as well. The Wisconsin Bike Federation has an office in Fitchburg. In addition, Ceres Cycling, which is a large bicycle component and accessory manufacturer located just off of Verona Road. And then Race Day Events recently built their headquarters in Fitchburg, just off of Seminole Highway. In addition, Fitchburg has been named a bike-friendly community. We're currently a silver-rated bike-friendly community. We had previously been a bronze community, so we did move up. There are 22 bike-friendly communities in Wisconsin, but of note, just 7 of them are at silver or above. And actually, of those 7 at silver or above, 6 are at silver. Madison is the only one that is actually above a silver ranking. And then there are also multiple businesses that are in bicycle-friendly programs. The city of Fitchburg has 79 miles of biking and shared use roads. And then we also have a unique feature in Fitchburg, a bike roundabout. I know when it was built, it was the only one in the state. I believe that is still the case. So this is a case where we have multiple trails coming together and intersecting in an actual roundabout, which again, it's a unique feature, and it's something that has become a hub for cycling, because from that roundabout, you can either go to downtown Madison, you can continue south, actually all the way to Illinois, you can go west out to Dodgeville. It's really been kind of a nice feature within Fitchburg. We also have 2 mountain bike parks within the city, Quarry Ridge and Dolly Park. When we get to a future slide, you'll actually be able to see those. It's kind of cool on a map that shows ridership patterns within the city. And then additionally, the Fitchburg Chamber Visitor and Business Bureau conducted a survey and found that many respondents reported their employees biking to work, and as well as their customers. And then identified some primary barriers to cycling, and that over 10% of respondents are currently or would be interested in becoming bicycle certified or bike friendly certified. Next slide, please. So this next image here is a map of Fitchburg, and this is a heat map generated by an application called Strava. So Strava is it's an app you can download to your phone, or you can use on a cycling computer that clips onto your handlebars, and it records people as they bike or run. There's multiple activities, but the map here is actually showing specifically cycling in Fitchburg. And just to give you an idea, so the red lines are kind of showing areas with minimal activity, up into kind of the oranges and yellows are additional activity, and then you kind of get to that white hot rating where there's a significant amount of traffic traveling through there by bike. Some things you can just notice if you look at the top of the map, you can see first off, Phil's got the right by kind of the Velo Underground. That's the bicycle roundabout. But you can see the Badger State Trail headed south, as well as Seminole Highway running parallel to it. The Capital City and Cannonball paths you can see running on the top of the screen, running east-west. And then Military Ridge Trail, which is running off to Verona and eventually Dodgeville. A couple other features you can see. There's sort of a white blob coming off of the Military Ridge Trail. That is the Quarry Ridge Bike Park, the mountain bike park. So I think, again, you can really see there's a tremendous amount of activity going on there. And then you can also see the Dolly Park. While it doesn't get quite as much usage, it's still being used pretty frequently. And just a couple other things to note. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I think you can see if you look at kind of the major car corridors in Fitchburg, like Fish Hatchery Road, which you can see there, it's in red, it's not highly used, or McKee Road. Neither of those is particularly well used, but then if you go down just a little bit, you can actually see Schumann, which actually has significantly more traffic on it, bike traffic, than McKee does. And then you go a little bit further south, and then you can see Lacey Road, where there's just a tremendous amount of bike traffic. And I think that speaks to the fact that the city has recently installed additional bike infrastructure in the form of bike lanes and a shared use path. Just to get the idea that sort of if you build it, they will come. People will use cycling infrastructure if it's there. And next slide, please. And then this is a statement from the chamber. I won't read the whole thing, but it's really, I think the gist here is this is something that the Fitchburg Chamber Visitor Business Bureau has been focused on. They have their Bike the Berg campaign. It's really a part of their branding. They see a significant amount of bike tourism that comes in to the city, in addition to supporting local retailers like Fitchburg Cycles or manufacturers like Saris. One other thing I would mention here is, in addition to the chamber being one of our partners, and Angela Kinderman does sit in on our meetings and is very helpful with that, there's another entity which is Bike Fitchburg. They are a nonprofit organization, so they have a similar role to the bike committee in the sense that they are bike advocates, but just kind of in your minds to differentiate the two, bike committee is the official city body. If you have an issue related to sort of bike infrastructure and how it relates to the city, an example, we actually just recently received a concern about a shared use path along McKee Road, so that's something we'll be taking up at our next meeting. Those types of things are what the bike committee looks at, whereas Bike Fitchburg is more of they can do fundraising. They can also do things like social rides. For example, they have a ride every Thursday afternoon where it's more of a social event. So that there's kind of a distinction between what our two groups do, although in some ways they have kind of a similar mission. Next slide, please.
I think we're back to Mark.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Andy. That was some very good information there, and you'll hear a little bit more about Bike Fitchburg and events as we go along with the presentation. So again, we talked about why we're a committee, what we're doing. These are the priorities that we have developed in 2019 when I became chair. We stepped back and said, what are we going to work on? So again, I won't read them all to you, but the first thing we're trying to do is increase the ridership and enjoyment of cycling in Fitchburg by improving the trail networks, doing outreach and education, offering new programs and partnerships. And you're going to hear more so about some partnerships down the road. And then we'll be talking a little bit about equity. We know we need to work a lot more on being sure that we have equitable access across this city so there aren't any barriers. The biggest thing we've been working on with Bill Balke and Andrew McFadden, the new person at the city, is cycling safety. And as all these roads are redone around the city, he's sitting down with us and coming to our committee, and we've been participating in the public meetings just to listen. So we know what's going on and taking our feedback. A good example is the one that I know Mayor Richardson was on a couple weeks ago about Lacey Road and what was going to happen to the intersection. And then you've got a bike path about the Cap City Trail, the Badger State Trail is not even 100 yards from that intersection. And that's still one of those things that's got to be looked at in the long run. But we hope we're here to help. And we, as Andy said, we do take feedback on issues. And we'll go and look on things. We helped Bill Balke last year do the detour for the McKee, the second phase, that McKee project, and those kind of things. So we're meeting regularly with them. We're also leaking with the police department as we have issues that deal with them, and they've been very good. And Ned Hartwick from Chief Breckland's staff has been our key liaison there. And then lastly, we're beginning to partner with surrounding communities. Andy mentioned Bike Fitchburg. I'm not going to talk about that anymore, but we've been talking to Madison. We've been talking with Monona. They're getting a bike community active, and they're right now bronze, and they want to move up. And the first thing they did after they talked to me and formed their committee was that they began to put priorities together and are working. Because Monona, with the pandemic, people riding through Monona has really increased as well with that lake loop. So the key with this is that it's a collaborative effort. We're working with our colleagues. We're not working in a vacuum. And we literally had, you're going to hear later on, but we had so much work that as I became chair, I realized we couldn't do this every 4 months because we basically would have a meeting, we'd, so to speak, go away and have to come back and pick up stuff that hadn't gotten done. So we've begun to move a little bit faster, and thank you for letting us meet every other month now. I think it will help us get what we need to get done. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to go through these kind of quickly because Andy has covered a couple of these. We are currently a bike-friendly community, and we're ranked silver. Madison is platinum. We're not going to get to platinum, but we think we can get to gold, and we've set that as a goal of our committee. And to do that, there'll be a couple things you'll hear at the end of this presentation. Angela, as Andy said, Angela Kinderman at the Chamber is very proud that we can tout this bike-friendly community being silver. We also have some bike-friendly businesses. We were getting ready to have a few more, but quite frankly, the pandemic kind of put a stop to that. We're getting ready to recircle that in the next couple of months. In addition, there's another organization called People for Bikes. It's not as big as the bike-friendly community, but we're 5th of 18 cities in Wisconsin. So there are things going on that rank us. We're hopefully to improve that ranking and go to gold. We think it will be something that all of you will be proud to say as things go forward. We know the Chamber will be. We also have some businesses I'll talk more about later who are very much into wanting more biking around the city for their employees, et cetera. In May, we're going to have National Bike Month. We will participate with that. Along with that, there'll be Bike to School and Work Week. That happens May every year. So as we have that, we will publicize those things both through the Fitchburg website and the Chamber website and the Bike Fitchburg website to get as much publicity out as we can. You heard, I don't mountain bike, but you heard Andy mention there are two highly rated mountain bikes tracks in this town. One is over on Prairie Ridge by the behind the Midwest Stone, and then the quarry, and the other is over by the Velo Round, which is stuck right down in there by where all these trails intersect. Every time I go by them, they're very busy, and my friends at Mountain Bike speak very highly of them. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are we going to be working on, and what are our upcoming goals? Excuse me. I've already covered the first three. I want to talk a little about the Bike the Burb campaign that's getting ready to come out with the Fitchburg Chamber in a couple of weeks. Angela is working. They've designed a website where city members can sign up and take a goal that we're going to bike X times or X miles over the course of the summer. And then she's hopefully will have some things at the end that will be able to celebrate that, whether it be some drawings, some door prizes, but more importantly, to get people to get out and get people talking with each other around the whole area of bicycling. We can give you the link to this, even though it's not live yet, but I don't want to go through the whole program, but it's very easy to sign up, and it's going to be out there hopefully the 1st of April. One that's coming that's very important to me, because I got to sit in with Wade Thompson on it, is there's the neighborhood hub going in up by the Leopold area and Leopold and Nine Springs golf course area. There will be a bike feature there, and Madison is doing something over north of Leopold, and we've been talking to them. There's most likely going to be an adult feature over there, and we hope to work to put a feature for kids at the neighborhood hub. So you'll have both groups accommodated as the planning goes forward, and it will even make Fitchburg more on the bicycle map, because I think that over there by Leopold, it's right there on the border, and I don't know if it's going to become part of, I don't think it's the town of Madison, I think it's the city of Madison, but at any rate, it's right there. The next thing I mentioned, the bicycle-friendly community and our scorecard of silver right now. We hope to be able to do enough new things and follow up on what I'm going to call our deficiencies, or from the 2019 rating to apply for gold in 2022. And then lastly, and I think if Phil gets some more time, he'll talk about this, but Phil has been talking quietly with Trek, who'd like to bring some e-bikes out here to Fitchburg. So we may see some bike share pilots going on in 21 or 22. It's not done yet. It's just an idea that's going on, and Trek has approached us as they move forward. So next slide. And then again, I've already talked about some of these, and I won't repeat it, but we talked about the road construction, the goal discussions, the bike sharing. The other thing we haven't talked about is that one of our biggest duties is to communicate to the community and to bike members about closures and expansions. And there's a lot of construction going on around the city. There's going to be a lot more. So we will see, we see that as being one of our big responsibilities. I think Andy mentioned the biking survey that we did through the Fitchburg Chamber. We are dissecting that and going back through, and we'll be following up with certain businesses about how they can become more bike friendly, what we can do to help them achieve that goal and be a bike friendly business as well. I mentioned that we have the Fitchburg Police Department on, they attend our meetings periodically. And then the neighborhood hub I've already talked about. And then lastly, there's a survey that was done a year ago about bike parking around the city, and we have access to that survey. To be candid, we have not torn into it as of yet to study it thoroughly, but we think we know where folks are going, and we think we know where all the bike parking places are around town. Next slide, please. So again, this is just one example. I think Joe said as he introduced us that our committee isn't just a fun committee. We do a lot of work, but there are some fun things that go on around the biking committee and biking in Fitchburg. Believe it or not, this group of people last September rode to the Illinois border at night. This is led through Bike Fitchburg, and most of you probably know who Thad Schumacher is. He's standing in the back of that picture, the big guy back there, and he's the pharmacist at Fitchburg Pharmacy. They take the trail, the Badger State Trail, down to the Illinois border and turn around and come back. Well, it rained that night all last year, so that's a long night. I do not participate, but they get about 50 hardy souls. Last year they had about that number, 15, I think, in the room, but it's a great event, and it's one of those things that gets us some notoriety, good notoriety, about riding. It's just one example.
I'm still cleaning mud off my bike.
Oh, okay. So next slide, please. A couple more quick ones. I want to thank all of you in the City Hall leadership for getting that bridge across McKee Road. You can see Mayor Richardson speaking to us there last fall. I don't know about you folks, but I've almost hit there several times on my bike, and I almost probably got in a couple of auto accidents at that intersection when folks came across on bikes. So it was well needed and deserved, and we appreciate it. So we view the city as one of our partners. So thanks again to all of you for that. Next slide. At the same time, a couple more things about successes. We talked about the pick me up at the border. I've talked about the bridge. If you look at the three things at the bottom, last fall there was the two breweries in Madison, Delta Beer Lab, which is supposed to come into Madison as the town initiative comes through, and Hop House Brewing, which is now on Seminole Highway. They didn't have a race, it was a ride. And it was about 11 miles between the two breweries, and you signed up and you rode from one to the other. It's a beautiful day. I participated. I think some others on the committee did as well. And those are the kind of things that you're going to see people doing. Now, we as a city bike committee do not sponsor those. We will share the word that they're out there, but we don't sponsor. At the same time, if you get a chance, look up race day events online. They put on literally hundreds of events throughout the state. And of course, last year, everything was canceled. So they held some virtual events. They also put on Fitchburg Festival of Speed. Another one I'm going to mention to you that's not on here is the Bike for Boys and Girls Club. Every year for the past 10 years, it's gone out of McKee Farms Park. It was canceled last year. And it's been renamed now, Move for Boys and Girls Club, and they've added running as well as walk into this thing. I brought this event to Fitchburg, to McGee Farms Park 10 years ago. At my suggestion, I suggested Mayor Path back then, because there was no parking at Edgewood College where it used to come out of. It outgrew where it was, and it's been a great success out here. So we partner with the Boys and Girls Club every year to have this event as well. So next slide. Again, we've covered all of these things, except I want to cover one more on here, and that's free bikes for kids. This begins to get into the equity things that are going on around our city. Is these folks who are buying new bikes or have a bike sitting in a garage, they want to get rid of it. You could donate this free bikes for kids last winter. And then we had two Fitchburg collections locations that collected these bikes. They gave out 1,041 bikes in last September. Anybody who wanted or needed one, a lot of work was done with the Boys and Girls Club on this. Their goal for next year is to collect 2,021. Again, kind of timely, but 2021 is the goal next year. So double what they got this year. And hopefully, so anybody who wants to bike is going to have access to it. Next slide. So as we move into 2021, I've covered most of these, and I'll be very brief. And Phil's going to get ready to wrap us up here with some detailed folks things. But we want to redesign the bike registration system. You'll see a slide on this in a minute. We're working with the police department. It is one of our deficiencies that was identified during the scorecard report that came back to us. The second thing on here is enhance our biking data collection. We have no idea how many people are riding through our city, whether it's riding through your city for recreation, riding to go shopping, riding to go to go to work. Back before the pandemic, we knew there was a significant number of people going through Fitchburg, for example, to work at Epic. Epic, it isn't happening as much anymore, but there'll be back to some kind of normalcy where folks will be going out there again. We're going to work on that. We have a proposal that you're going to be hearing about. We're going to have our journey to gold, and we hope in 2022 we'll be applying to become a gold community. We continue to use the bike and ped plan from 17 as our benchmark to work from. I've talked to you about constructions, the neighborhood hub, and then I briefly mentioned that the bike share pilot program that we hope to get going sometime this year or early next year, because the whole phenomenon of bike sharing is gotten huge in Madison, and it continues to grow across the country. So to do all of these things, we couldn't do this meeting every quarter. So again, I want to thank the city for letting us go to bi-monthly meetings as the chair. I know I was kind of pushing for this for a while, and I think it will help us feel like we're supporting you guys and you're supporting us as we try and move things forward. So thanks again on that one. Next slide, please. I'm going to briefly talk about this and then turn it back over to Phil. So one of the things that we currently have in place in Fitchburg is, I don't have the ordinance in front of me, but section 68-283 mandates bike registration, but this ordinance isn't enforced. So this was identified as we applied for our for our status last year with the bike league, in 19. And they said, well, just if you're not enforcing it, just get rid of the ordinance. Registration is primarily used to return lost and stolen bikes to owners. Right now, you pay $5 a bike, and it's run through the police department. I think the key with this to understand is that in 2018, they had 4 people register their bikes. Now, I'm sure, and since I was 2 of them, I'm sure there were more people that bought bikes that year, but nobody registered them. So we've been working with Lieutenant Hardwick and Chad Bricklin about redesigning a registration ordinance on this to make it not an ordinance, and hopefully go to a national system that offers free registration. It also will make it easier to have a national system, as bikes sometimes get stolen here and could end up in Chicago tomorrow, as we all know. So at any rate, this was the first thing. We viewed this as low-hanging fruit, and you'll be hearing more about it shortly. Next slide. Okay, and I'm going to also briefly cover this and turn it back over to Phil, is that the other Achilles heel we had in our scorecard was bicycle ridership. But I mentioned earlier, we don't have any idea about how many people are riding on these trails out here, our 79 miles of trails, or even on our streets. And we need to find a way to get a handle on this. The league has us identified in a category that they said 0.76 of our folks bike. And we know that's not true, because that's only about 250 people. And so we're trying to come up with a strategy to get more accurate bike counting. It doesn't capture at all the data they're giving us for recreation or non-work travel. And we're hoping down the road to get some strategically located bike counters. And I think that what we want to be able to do is move towards this. We don't have to have this now, because frankly, we've got some trails torn up that where a lot of the bikers ride, that we wouldn't want to be counting now anyway. But we want you folks to understand that about how many people bike in this town. And I think that's a key right now. It's just subjective. If you go out and bike or you go out and walk, you see a lot of bikers. So we're going to be coming to you to talk about a better way to collect data that will give us accurate data. So next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Phil, and he's going to talk about this little scorecard that we have been working from for the last 2 years. So all yours, Phil. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. And it's just the last couple slides here. I want to make sure we have time for questions. You've definitely already, you've heard a little bit about the bike-friendly community process. This is really a cooperative effort where The applications have been pursued by a coordination of city staff, the bicycle committee, Bike Fitchburg, and the Fitchburg Chamber. This is really something that benefits all of these groups. You know, it's fantastic in terms of advertising Fitchburg as a bicycling destination, but it also just maybe a little selfishly, it's sort of an acknowledgement that the things that we have pursued that we feel make us bicycle friendly. We want to push ourselves to getting gold as a recognition because we think it makes us look great, but we also feel that would demonstrate that we've done the things we feel are necessary to make this city friendlier, more equitable, just overall more bikeable. A couple things that just sharing a few screenshots here from our 2019 bike friendly application and the report card we got back from the League of American Bicyclists. We're actually really close to a lot of the standards for average gold cities, and a couple places where we're a little bit shorter. You know, bike education in schools is a difficult thing because we don't have our own school districts, but certainly we can still pursue more bike education in general. Compared to the average gold, our bike network mileage is a little bit low relative to our total road network mileage. Now, of course, there's a little bit of a caveat with that your typical community applying for bike-friendly community doesn't have such a large proportion of rural road mileage, but still we know that this is something we can increase. We have been increasing it. And so we're confident that is going to increase to a level that it'll make us a much stronger candidate for gold. The Active Bike Advisory Committee, Mark mentioned this. We previously met quarterly. The committee is now meeting every other month. We want to look to get that increase to 6 meetings a year funded permanently, beginning with 2022. But overall, really a lot of. Oh, I apologize. Sorry, are you still able to hear me?
We still got you, Phil.
Okay, my Bluetooth headset cut out, so I guess you're getting me through my laptop microphone now. But yeah, so for a lot of these building blocks of a bike-friendly community, Fitchburg is in a really strong place. That's one thing that I think that we stress time and again is that Fitchburg is very bike-friendly now. So there's no kind of red flag alert going on. We just know we can be better. We know we can be stronger, and that's what we're trying to push for. You know, a couple of these scores here in terms of the broader categories the Bike League looks at, we're doing really well right now. The ridership, you know, we're looking to find a better way to capture that data. We feel that the data they're using may not be the most accurate, but we also know we have room to grow in terms of encouraging ridership and making ridership, both bicycles and our trail infrastructure, more accessible to people who want to get out there. So definitely some places where we know we can make improvements, and we're working with the Bike League to identify those and work on them. And these are the 6 key areas identified in our last assessment that we needed to work on specifically. You know, Mark mentioned this mandatory bike registration ordinance. This is something that the city of Madison in January eliminated from their code of ordinances. City of Winona is looking at it as well. There are better registration systems that are free to users, and they're national, which means if your bike is lost across city lines, you can now get coordination between the different regions. We just feel like that's a better way to go and makes us more accessible. These are kind of the 2 biggest things we're working on at the moment: our ridership and registration. A few other areas the Bike League identified that we could improve, but these are the 2 that we really look at as the keys that make us more accessible and bike friendly. And Mark, do you want me to cover this, or do you want to take it over for the last slide?
I'm going to wrap this up real briefly. So I want to share with you, as COVID hit, our committee kept working. I think that says a lot, that we see the importance of this. And again, with your support, the city's support, and our alder's support, and the mayor's support as well, we're going to continue to work on these things. We're going to enhance cycling safety and ridership. We've got staff support through Phil. We will talk with you folks as much as you want to hear from us. Let us know. I used to run into Aaron pre-COVID once in a while, would bend his ear about this. And I thank you, Aaron, for supporting us. We're going to want a little bit of money, and it's not going to be much, but we're going to need to we're going to need to spend a little bit of money to get into the, to count folks and to maybe and perhaps to get into the bike index. It's not a significant amount of money at all, but we want to strengthen our reputation as a premier city. And that's the goal we have. So with your support, I appreciate your time tonight. I also want to thank again our whole committee's support and Phil's support, because while we're doing a lot of work, it has been a fun group to work with. And I think that's what's serving your city, as long as I think we're doing something and we're making biking better here. Feel free to reach out to me. I know some of you have my email, but I once we can be out in person, I try and attend a lot of meetings. So I'm going to open it up to you. We have a few minutes left. Are there any comments, anything else you'd like us to work on, or do you have any questions?
Okay, so Phil, can you take the presentation down so I can see all the people? Any questions? Dorothy.
Thanks. I was taking some notes, so I'm going to just touch a couple of things and then I'll get back with people. One concern that I've had is that Thermo Fisher is doing a landfill project between Cap City Trail and Badger State Trail that I'm concerned about stormwater runoff issues. I know Cap City has had problems with flooding. I also know that Madison is doing a study and some work up in that area, but that's something that I'd appreciate the bike community keeping an eye on for us. On our CIP currently now, we've got the Duns Marsh Recreational Circuit to build a linking path parallel to Seminole Highway inside the marsh area to complete literally the recreational circuit from Cannonball around to the underround and back on Cannonball, and then just a path that would link those so bikes and families don't have to go on Seminole Highway to go around the marsh. Something to play with in the future. I know of a piece of land right next to the Ice Age Trail that is 80 acres of hilly woods that is going to be going to the county in time. I've talked with the property owner about another mountain bike trail system. The county is currently buying 20 acres from the same owner that's next to the soccer fields. That is traditional cropland. So she's already in the county thing. So I'd like you guys to help promote getting that real active. For equity issues, bike parking at apartment buildings is something to talk about. We give kids the free bikes and everything, but they've got nowhere to put them safely outside and nowhere inside that they're allowed to have bikes. They can't leave them in the hallways, and usually the rooms in those apartments are too small. And the question that I'll leave with you guys is, we used to do bike rodeo every year. Can we talk about bringing that back?
So really quickly, one thing I actually do want to mention, I left out of the slideshow, and this is an oversight on my part, is you mentioned the Cap City Trail and a couple county things. Dane County Parks manages some of the trails coming through Fitchburg, and they've also been a fantastic partner. We've communicated, the committee has communicated with Dane County Parks some of those concerns regarding flooding on trails, and they've been really responsive about looking into those and trying to address those concerns. So we're hopeful that'll continue to be the case, certainly. Regarding
Dorothy,
the bike, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
No, you go ahead, Phil.
Regarding the bike rodeos, usually we're looking for somebody who is an accredited bike instructor to lead those. And we had one certified bike instructor. He has left Fitchburg. So Mark has actually been working on trying to identify one or two new individuals who would be able to take that over.
Yeah, I will add on to that, Dorothy. I can answer that question. That's something, those education things and bike rodeos is something through Bike Fitchburg. They had a board meeting 2 nights ago. That's on the agenda to get some educational events going as we can move out of COVID. The bike track is in I think Tony Hartman has it now. To be candid, he's a former alder. He's now vice president of Bike Fitchburg, but they were able to locate it. It belonged to the person who left town. He was the trainer. So Bike Fitchburg needs to also get a trainer to do this. So it's on the agenda. It will be forthcoming because we have to do it for our gold status as well. So it's already there.
Okay, any other question? No? Okay, so thank you very much, bike committee. I used to be in the bike committee once for a year, so it was fun. So it's a fun committee, so thank you and very good information, and I think we need to work hard to become a goal community, so okay, thank you very much. So okay, so next, our next presentation is findings of the Lake Barney Stormwater Management Study, and Claudia Guy and Strand Associates are here tonight. I don't know, Claudia, can you take it from here?
Yes, I can. And Julia, can you remind me, do we have public comment before or after the presentation?
We'll do it after.
Okay, because I know there are some folks on the line who wanted to speak, so just wanted to double check that. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so can everyone see the presentation? All right, perfect, thank you. So thank you for the opportunity to come and present the final findings from our Lake Barney stormwater investigation. My name is Claudia Guy. I'm the environmental engineer for the city of Fitchburg, and I'm joined today by Nick Hayden, who is here with EOR. Today we're going to review the project background and goals, go over hydrology analysis and conclusions, as well as the conceptual designs to help solve the issues in this area. Then we're going to move into the findings from our cost-benefit analysis. We'll start with going over the project benefits as well as the project costs, and then end with the cost-benefit analysis. Section 3, we're going to discuss our conclusions and recommendations, and also our next steps. So we're going to go over some project information here. For the folks listening at home, I did want to mention that we came to a committee of the whole meeting previously. It was August 23rd. So if you missed that, there's a lot more background information in that recording. You can find that on Fact TV, but we're going to go over just some of the background information here as well. Area history. So Lake Barney, as you can see on the left-hand image there, is located in the south area of Fitchburg. It is south of County Highway M and east of the intersection with Kane Road. To the south of Lake Barney is the town of Oregon, and then to the southeast is the village of Oregon. Lake Barney is part of a group of glacial kettles, including Swan Pond, which is the pond all the way on the west on that image, and it does not have a surface water outlet under normal conditions. On the right-hand side, you can see what this lake normally looks like. That's based on looking at aerial photography back to the 1950s. This is what we typically would see for Lake Barney. So the footprint is about 42 acres, and that's at elevation 942. So just reiterating, the typical range for this lake is between 942 to 945 feet and covers between 40 to 60 acres. Starting in early 2018, the combination of high annual precipitation, several large runoff producing storms, and rising groundwater caused the lake to grow from 40 acres to over 300 acres, joining with several wetlands to the west. The lake peaked at a stage elevation of approximately 949 in September of 2018. It started to overflow in the fall of 2018, and it overflowed continuously from then until July 2020, when it naturally was able to stop. And you can see on the bottom left-hand photo what Lake Barney looks like in a more typical year versus what it grew to in 2020. And I'll just comment that that image is just, an image that we had available, but it did get even bigger than that. And my understanding is that it actually connected all the way to Swan Pond, which is that pond on the west-hand side. So the footprint got even bigger than what you see there. So impacts that we saw as a result of that, the upper left-hand image is a photograph of the Thayer property. So you can see he's erected a temporary dike around his property in order to protect that house from the floodwaters. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see this is John Brown's home in the town of Oregon. He had to fill in his basement due to high groundwater essentially seeping into his basement. So he had to fill that in with concrete. His sump pumps could not keep up with that. And then towards the bottom of the screen, you can see this is Netherwood Road in the village of Oregon, and you can see that this road has overtopped. It resulted in road closures for them, as well as needing to rent a pump to get water from one side of the road to the other to avoid potential road damage there. And another thing I didn't want to forget to mention, of course, is agricultural loss as well, just due to saturated soils. I didn't have an image for that, but just to mention that was also a big impact. The goals of this project was to determine what can be done to improve the negative impacts that we've seen surrounding Lake Barney. And the key project outcomes were conceptual designs of flood mitigation alternatives, as well as an estimated time to drain for those alternatives compared to what would happen naturally, and then a cost-benefit analysis, which we'll go into today. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Nick to go over this section here.
Thanks, Claudia. Let me just pull that up. Okay, can everyone see this? Okay, as Claudia mentioned, I'm going to give a fairly brief overview of some of the hydrology analysis that went into this project, looking at both the groundwater and surface water systems. So among the hydrology methods that we used, we collected some field data. So we put in 4 monitoring wells around the lake. We took flow measurements at the outfall. These supplemented some earlier flow measurements that had been taken by a few firms. And we also collected lake level information and collected some of the additional information contributed by Tom Thayer, who has been taking a very good record of data to help kind of track the lake levels over time. We also made use of Dane County's countywide groundwater model, and we were able to use that to sort of test some of our ideas in terms of management of the lake and kind of current groundwater conditions and flow into the lake. We developed a hydrology model so we could look at runoff entering the lake system during storm events, and to try to get a sense of matching up the flows coming off of the watershed with what we were able to see in the record of lake stage. And then we did a fair amount of testing of various alternatives. So putting in ditches at different elevations and getting the sense for both how quickly the lake would drain down, as well as kind of what the downstream impacts would be during storm events. So I'm going to jump kind of straight to our big conclusions so we have time to talk more about costs and next steps at the end. So one of the conclusions from our analysis was that the recent water levels are unprecedented, which made it a little challenging to look back to see kind of get an estimate of how long the lake might take to recede naturally. But we were able to look at some past data, especially the record after the most recent high lake levels in 2008 to 2010. And we estimated that it could take 5 to 10 years for the lake to drop down back to that more normal level of 942 under normal climate conditions, or potentially longer if the recent very wet precipitation patterns we've seen continue. A second conclusion is that this long timeline for drawdown is due mostly to the slow nature of groundwater movement. And until the water table drops across the area, the lake will continue to drain slowly, and it will be susceptible to being filled back up again during heavy rain events without an outlet. Installing an outlet would lower the lake level fairly rapidly, but there would be a period of time after the initial lowering where the groundwater would continue to trickle in over the course of 1 to 3 years likely, but it would be at a pretty slow rate. The soils surrounding the lake and in the shallow aquifer are pretty slow at transmitting water. Another thing we looked at on kind of a different aspect is sort of what happens with the lake in regards to being a benefit to flood protection downstream. And we ran a series of different models to look at kind of what happens if you start at a different lake level and you get a big rain event. And we found that downstream flood risk increases rather suddenly once the lake is at 945 feet or higher. This is due to the lake and wetlands no longer having enough storage to prevent the lake from overflowing during large events. So next I'm going to cover our conceptual solutions, which are more or less the same as what we presented last time, but I wanted to kind of just run through what we're proposing and the different alternatives we're looking at again. So we looked at 3 lake level control options, which each include an outlet structure and a drainage ditch and greenway from Lake Barney to the village of Oregon. The options differ in the target lake stage, and the 3 target lake stages that we chose were based on the results of the hydrology analysis, and they were 942 feet, 944 feet, and 945 feet. And if you can see my mouse, it's pretty simple schematic, but you can see we've got in yellow here the proposed route of a ditch kind of joining up with Lake Barney at one of its lower elevations or more normal elevations. Going to the south and then to the east, crossing the Rotary Trail, which is where we envision the outlet control structure, which would control the water level in the lake and meter the overflow out at a acceptable rate downstream. And then you can see this is a slightly earlier image. We've got one where we kind of show it going around the wetlands, which are these areas in green. But regardless, the path would kind of head to the east across Alpine Dairy property and then curve back up towards some proposed new culvert going underneath Cusick Parkway into the village of Oregon. So this is an example of a more detailed layout that we have alongside of or included within our report, showing these same elements. And you can see here a little bit better, probably the yellow line is the Rotary Trail. So you can see the crossing here. And this one shows a little bit more of the kind of wrapping around the preliminary wetlands that were identified with our project, just to avoid those impacts to the extent possible. So some of the conclusions that we had after looking through these design alternatives. For any alternative, we think that our outlet can be configured so that the draft peak flow rates acceptable to the Village of Oregon can be met for storms up to the 100-year storm. And this assumes that those proposed stormwater conveyance improvements that they have designed downstream can proceed. And this became kind of a sticking point as the project continued for us, is that their proposed improvements are kind of at a standstill right now. They've had some initial denial of their application to establish drainage ways through Lerner Park as part of their drainage district. And it remains to be seen whether or not they'll ultimately get those approved. And those do need to be approved for water to be sent downstream to the Village of Oregon under this system. Then the other note on this, so like I said, we can kind of tweak the outlet to provide an acceptable downstream flow for any of the alternatives. Once you get to much larger storms, so greater than the 100-year rainfall, we see that alternative one demonstrates a clearer flood control benefit than the other two. And just to reiterate, alternative one would be the lowest lake stage. So that would be bringing it all the way back down to 942 feet. So we did a fair amount of investigation with the groundwater model, and we found that artificially lowering the lake with an outlet would limit the water table from rising during very wet periods, such as what we've seen recently. The extent of the area where groundwater would be lowered by 1 foot or more is predicted by the groundwater model to range from about 1,000 acres for a lake outlet at 945 feet to about 3,000 acres for a lake outlet at 942 feet. So if you look to the image on the right, those black circles are showing that predicted drawdown. And so this is for the situation where we have a period of weather like we've seen recently, where groundwater is very high and is causing and contributing to slow surface drainage and wet areas at the surface. Those areas within those black footprints are showing where we predict if you were to lower the lake with an outlet, how far out would you impact groundwater levels in a meaningful way. And I should note that despite those rather large areas of 1,000 to 3,000 acres, it's not saying that that's the amount of acreage that would be helped by this necessarily. So we know that some of the areas within those large drawdown footprints are lands that are high above the water table or did not experience surface water ponding or flooding during these recent years. And so the kind of impacted areas that we're looking more to, how would the solution help those areas are the ones shown in orange on that figure. So these were areas that were, based on aerial imagery, clearly too wet to farm during 2019, but were normally a farmable area. So we also wanted to look at, as I mentioned, how quickly would an outlet for any given alternative draw the lake down once it was constructed. And they all happened fairly quickly. The estimated time to drain the lake from its current state, which is about 947 feet, to the target elevations ranges from 49 to 87 days, compared again to our best estimate of 5 to 10 years with no outlet. And I think lastly on this, the design conclusions, so there's a considerable amount more earthwork associated with that lower overflow elevation, which is the alternative one, versus the other options. The reason being there's a fair amount of high ground sort of in between the lake margin and Cusick Parkway. And so there's not a whole lot of elevation loss between those two areas. And so for that alternative one to bring the lake all the way down to 942 feet, it needs to be quite a deep ditch to get down there. And this table, which I won't go through all the numbers, but the key finding with these preliminary designs was that alternative one takes about 30,000 cubic yards of excavation versus about half that for alternative two, which is the 944 lake level, and even less for alternative three. That amount of earthwork contributes to alternative one being a much more expensive project estimate than the others. So next, I wanted to go into the cost benefit analysis, which I think we introduced last time, but basically just described what we were going to do. So this is likely all new, and we'll cover it in a little bit more detail. So the first thing we calculated were the benefits. And so we calculated residents' potential losses due to high lake levels, and then considered the city's benefit to be the avoidance of those losses. So for each alternative, there were two types of losses that we considered. One was short-term agricultural losses, loss of crops or loss of rental income. And the second was long-term property devaluation. And we had to get creative with how we thought about these benefits and these impacts. And those did include some assumptions in order to work through these. So for the short-term benefits, what we assessed was the maximum benefit of an outlet in a very wet year in terms of impacted croplands. So we know that that's the maximum benefit, but there would be dry or normal years where the outlet would provide no short-term benefit to landowners. For the long-term property devaluation, we are assuming that high water conditions seen recently in 2008 to 2010 and from 2018 to the present are likely to occur again, or at least frequently enough that the properties are no longer reliably farmable. So to come up with our short-term benefit calculations, the first thing we did, which you've seen this image before, is determine these areas where each outlet is predicted to lower surface water and groundwater by at least 1 foot. We also, as I said before, identified areas that were clearly wet and clearly impacted by high water previously. Then we determined the potential revenue lost from farming that acreage of land in 1 year. And again, with the caveat that the short-term benefit ranges from $0 per year, potentially in dry to normal years, up to the dollar values that we calculated. So this upper table is showing the acreage that we predicted could be returned from a wet condition to a farmable condition under each outlet alternative. And then we further broke it out to how much of that land is within the city of Fitchburg. So you can see it ranges from 10 acres to 40 acres for the three alternatives. And then we just simply took that acreage and we came up with a range of benefit based on that acreage. The lower end of the range is just looking at lost rental income, which might be the case if you know up front it's not going to be a farmable acreage that year. The higher ends of the range are if you were to farm it most of the season and put in all the upfront costs, but then lose the crop suddenly due to high water. And so that would be more of the cost or the lost cost of sales. You can see those range from upwards of $28,000 maximum annual benefit for alternative one, then quite a bit smaller for alternative three, just based on how much protection the outlets provide to the surrounding area. So the second part was, again, the long-term property devaluation. This assumes that, without an outlet, certain lands that are no longer consistently farmable and they permanently lose value and become usable more as wetlands or recreational lands. The loss of value that would occur under that situation was calculated based on recent comparable real estate sales. We also looked at, without an outlet, the Thayer residents would need to be further protected with a permanent berm and pump system. This cost to cure of a permanent berm and pump system was assessed for the no outlet condition and for the alternatives, which require smaller protective features. So with no outlet, we estimate these long-term costs to be $185,000 of agricultural land evaluation and $114,000 for a cost to cure for the Thayer residents. So after looking at the no outlet, we came up with those same calculations for each of our alternatives and compared those calculations to the no outlet situation in order to put a value on the project. So the long-term benefit to city residents ranges from $63,000 for alternative 3 up to $180,000 for alternative 1. So the next part of the cost benefit analysis was the project costs. So for each alternative, we put together sort of a standard engineering estimate based on our anticipated items, our estimated quantities and unit costs, and design services. This table shows for all 3 projects, our estimated costs. You can see again, the earthwork cost for alternative 1 is much greater than the other alternatives. We have other construction items such as the outlet itself, revegetation, erosion control. We have a contingency for dealing with unknowns, professional design fees, and that all adds up to our project construction cost, which ranges from about $540,000 up to $980,000. And again, the alternative 1 requires a much deeper ditch, as well as it being a little bit longer, just due to the lay of the land and the depth required. The large volume of excavated spoils to build the ditch would need to either be worked into the surrounding lands if it was acceptable to the landowners, or hauled off-site. So wetland mitigation is another potential large cost of the project. It will almost certainly be required for any outlet alternative and has the potential to be very expensive. So impacts near Lake Barney are pretty much guaranteed to happen as that area near the fringe of the lake has consistently been wetland when we look back at the aerial imagery over time. But the overflow route, which has been overflowing for 2 years now, and that may or may not be wetland, depending on the DNR's opinion and depending on the weather and the land use between now and when a formal wetland delineation would occur. Unfortunately, we were limited to doing what's called an off-site wetland characterization, where we had wetland experts look at aerial photography and soils to come up with their estimate of under normal conditions, not overflowing, which areas are truly wetlands. But unfortunately, we weren't able to get access to Alpine Dairy properties to observe current wetland characteristics along the overflow route, or to confirm what we came up with our off-site wetland analysis. So therefore, we have a very large range of potential mitigation costs. The upper end, as you'll see on the right end of the table, is considerable costs, and that's based on what we were told by the DNR, which was that it's possible that entire overflow route that's overflowing currently will create wetland characteristics along our potential route, and we would have to replace those through a wetland mitigation bank by purchasing credits to replace that acreage, at least 1.2 acres for every acre impacted, up to 1.7 or potentially even greater if the existing wetlands are high quality. Another project cost and something to figure out for design would be the easements. So a permanent easement would need to be obtained from both the Department of Corrections and Alpine Dairy to construct the project. We did not estimate easement costs, but we are thinking it's possible that costs might be less than a standard easement, as the project would improve the reliability of agricultural lands surrounding the ditch. In terms of the acreage required, the table at the bottom lays those out. It's roughly potentially 9 acres for alternative 1, which is deeper and wider, and then about 6 acres potentially for alternative 3, which is the shallowest ditch. This image just shows what I described in terms of the blue line. Again, it's on where the outlet would start, or the ditch would start, would be on Department of Corrections land, and then crossing the bike path and down to entirely around Alpine Dairy downhill downstream from the bike path. And this is in the details, but there's an existing culvert at Cusick that is currently slowly carrying some of the or at least when it was overflowing, could carry some of that runoff, but they are installing a new outlet there, or a new culvert there with much higher capacity, or they're proposing to install it if they get it approved. We also considered long-term O&M costs. So these are expected to include mowing twice per year, annual structure inspection and cleanout, and ditch dredging every 5 years. So to kind of put it all together, we decided to think of it in sort of a 20-year timeline to compare the cost and benefits. And so the first row on the table were a summation of the total benefits to city residents for the 3 alternatives. And so that assumes that short-term benefit that I described would occur in half of those 20 years, and that long-term property devaluation would also be avoided. The total project costs included several additional things on top of those sort of project construction costs that I showed earlier. So we did include 20 years of O&M, and we also, because that wetland mitigation potential cost is such an unknown and could be potentially so high, we chose to take 50% of that maximum mitigation cost and add it to the total alternative costs. So you can see that regardless of the alternative chosen, project costs are estimated to be much greater than the calculated benefits to city residents. But our quantitative cost benefits analysis doesn't include other factors which the city may want to consider. So some of the other benefits that we quantified to the degree that we could, many of these have to deal with potential project partners because they're describing downstream benefits. So as mentioned, depending on the final details of the configuration, the Village of Oregon would benefit from some downstream flood reduction by simply keeping more flood storage available to slow down runoff from a very large storm versus the current condition where there's essentially no storage because it would not take that large of a rainfall for the lake to start overflowing again. Another downstream benefit, again with the Village of Oregon, Claudia mentioned that they purchased and operated those pumps So that's a potential savings of $20,000 to $30,000 in a very wet year that they wouldn't need to spend. Additionally, we thought about the rotary trail, which for those of you who've biked out there is now sort of a wooden 2x4 and plywood temporary bridge, because it's low enough that it was eroded by the overflow from Lake Barney. So they've looked at one of the preliminary designs that they considered was to raise the trail 5 feet, well above the current elevation to keep that from happening again. And they estimated that cost at $367,000 $367,000. So that's a pretty major expense that we think if we had a controlled outlet and ditch system could be greatly reduced. And additionally, in terms of other downstream private folks, the ditch through the Department of Corrections and through Alpine Dairy Properties would not only increase the reliability of farming, but it would provide the required greenway and site drainage for any future development on those lands. We also know that there are additional potential benefits, which are qualitative or potentially subjective, or just very difficult to quantify. These include increased landowner peace of mind, reduced nuisance high water, things like yard flooding and wet ditches, reduced landowner costs to farm or access lands that are still dry enough to be farmable, but they might be difficult to access due to wet areas, as well as reduced negative ecological impacts. So we haven't covered this tonight, but large areas of mature oak trees around Lake Barney have died due to persistent high water, including on the Thayer property. Additionally, much of the original wetland fringe or sedge habitat around the lake has been replaced by open water. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who owns the land sort of on the north side of Lake Barney, has indicated they would prefer a return to a more typical lake levels in terms of habitat availability. So with that, I'll hand it back to Claudia. You want me to keep controlling the PowerPoint, or?
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Okay.
So just going over some final conclusions here. The costs, as Nick had mentioned, were considerably higher than the calculated benefit. But again, the city may place a higher priority on those qualitative benefits than the cost-benefit analysis does. And then another thing is, of course, that we may be able to find downstream municipal partners, specifically the Village of Oregon, who may be willing to partner with us on this project. Those conversations have been started, but at this time they have other priorities, so this is not their number one priority, but we plan to continue those conversations to see if they would be a willing partner. At the moment, they have a lot of other stuff, so not willing to commit at this time, but those conversations are ongoing. And then the third bullet here is it's possible that downstream landowners, not just the municipalities, might also be able to provide support, including easements, labor, or even financial contributions, since it seems to be in their interest to keep their agricultural lands workable or to have or to make the property suitable for future development by having a de facto greenway and stormwater conveyance feature installed. Alternative 2, which is that middle alternative, the target lake level being 944 feet, appears to strike the best balance between project cost, benefit, effectiveness, and ability to be approved by permitting agencies. And then just another reminder that the amount of wetland disturbance and required mitigation costs is unknown at this time, but it could add significant project costs. So our recommendations would be for council to review the project report and its conclusions, particularly the cost-benefit analysis, including likely project costs, calculated benefits, and other non-quantified benefits to city residents. The next steps. So the first thing that will happen is the study report will be finalized probably in the upcoming weeks. Once it is finalized, it will be put on that website, which is listed there. We'll let council know once that's up and available for folks to take a look at. We'll also be keeping an eye on those downstream infrastructure improvements in the Village of Oregon that Nick alluded to. So they're at the very beginning stages of getting that ditch through Lerner Park permitted. They'll need wetland permits, which is a very long process to get. So we don't anticipate that project occurring until 2022 at the earliest. So the recommendation is to hold off on any sort of design. Currently the design was actually scheduled for this year, but the recommendation is to hold off on that since the project really can't happen until those downstream improvements are made. So we want to make sure it's even possible before spending money on a design that may never get built. So the recommendation would be to wait until those improvements are in place. And that would also give us time to have more discussions with downstream partners to determine their true level of interest in this project. So the CIP's timeline will be adjusted to show design occurring in 2023, and then construction would be after that. We'll also continue discussions with the Village of Oregon to determine potential interest in cost sharing for this project, as well as continue discussions with the stakeholder group, which includes the Village of Oregon, Fish and Wildlife Service, Department of Corrections, Alpine Dairy, and other property owners to keep up to date on any developments that may impact this project. And if the project proceeds, we would recommend alternative 2, that 944 elevation, to be the basis for the design. Okay, so with that, we will open it up for questions. And if there are questions afterwards, my contact information is there as well.
So before the question, I think we have 2 people here that want to speak. I cannot see them. Okay, Tom.
So Tom, if you wanted to go first.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be fine. Thank you. First, I want to thank Claudia and the city of Fitchburg, along with Nick and all the people at EOR, for working on this study, along with all the other stakeholders within this event, including the Department of Corrections, Village of Oregon, and a lot of other people, a lot of property owners who are involved in this, other than myself and some of the surrounding people immediately. It's been a long process. It's been an interesting process, but I do thank you guys for all the hard work. My only comments are, I hope the Village of Oregon has experienced some delays here, but this is a event that has impacted our lives, not only the Thayer family lives, but my surrounding neighbors' lives substantially for a number of years. And as we've seen over the last decade or 20 years, the 2008 to 2010 flooding and the current 2018 to present flooding, that it appears to be, we're into a wet area due to climate change. So I think this needs to be addressed, whether it's in 2023 or sometime shortly, for the benefit of this whole area of South Fitchburg. I know Nick's calculations showed a relatively small area of farmland out of service based upon aerial photos and the wetness of it. But, you know, my farmland, which I'm a small farmland area. I only have 40 acres of farmland, was totally out of service in 2018 and 2019. 2020, of my 40 acres, we managed to farm about 25 acres, but due to the ongoing continued wet soil conditions, it was only about 60% productive. If you came out here, you would find areas of the corn that were planted that only got to be about 6 inches tall because of the wet groundwater conditions. So the impact is actually much larger than what might have been shown in the aerial photos and documentation. And I think my neighbors around us who are much bigger farms had the same impact. And it's been sad to see it. It's been sad to see that the other noted issue was the ecological change. I mean, we used to enjoy our wetlands. We had a couple small ponds out there and a lot of wildlife. That has all disappeared. We still have some wildlife. We have a lot of geese right now, but we used to have 3 pairs of nesting cranes. We might have 1 pair this year. Last year, we lost them all. So it has really impacted the ecological area, and I think the benefit that Fitchburg offers to people and everybody else. And not to speak for the Village of Oregon, but the Rotary Bike Trail has been out of service now for 3 years, and it's just not that area where you saw in the pictures of the wooden walkway. There are many areas of that bike trail still underwater today that are unusable. So I think there's a lot of benefits not only to the city of Fitchburg, but also to our downstream partners, the Village of Oregon and the town of Oregon, to keep moving this forward. And let's not forget that this needs to be addressed in the coming years as we continue to deal with climate change and other problems within our society. So I do want to thank the city of Fitchburg and everybody for their hard work on this.
Thank you, Tom. So who is next?
John Freiberger, can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't know why my video isn't working, sorry. I'm involved in farming in Fitchburg and have been for a long time, partnership with Jeff Raymond until he passed away. Between us, we own and manage 1,034 acres in Fitchburg. And I can tell you horror story after horror story about trying to farm on land that, if you look at it from the aerial photograph, looks to be just fine. But we left 200 acres of soybeans in the field one fall. It was dry enough to plant. It was never got dry enough to harvest. The next spring, they were underwater. I used to run about 30 acres of vegetables on Goodland Park Road until the new development went in there and we lost our land from Phil Spheum. So I decided to move the vegetables out to my farm. The first year we planted, our expectation was gross income of $44,000 per acre, and basically we lost 80%. If you wanted to harvest anything, we had to wade through water. I've spent between $40,000 and $50,000 hauling in gravel, fill, and breaker so that I can actually get out to dry areas to spread manure. I've lost 21 large walnuts, and if you drive down Highway M and look to the right, you'll see I took down another giant oak. That was a smaller one. It's probably only 300 years old. And I've got about 6 more to take down. Every tree I take down costs me about $1,000. So I'm probably looking at spending or having spent an average of $20,000 a year of the last couple of years just on the 40-acre home farm here. If we start taking a look at the losses that we have, as Tom explained, where we've got too much soil moisture, so we get lack of oxygen, so things don't grow, or we can't get it out of the field, the impact, I think, is quite understated in the analysis that we have. Basically, the Lake Barney watershed is really pretty large. I think there's about, if we take some of the land in Oregon, and I do talk to the Oregon farm owners, and the town of Oregon has indicated they may be willing to put a few dollars into this as well, because we've got about 400 acres in Oregon with high soil moisture levels, including that owned by John Brown of the infamous filled-in basement. And I think that there are probably 1,320 acres in parcels that are affected. Now, it's not 1,320 acres are affected, but in parcels. So you'll end up with a big wet spot in the middle of a cornfield. So you can't plant it all. And when you harvest it all, you can't drive in the straight lines you used to be able to. So there's a lot of inefficiencies that are coming into affect farming in Fitchburg. One reason I spent 20 years on the Plan Commission in Fitchburg was to try to make sure we could save rural Fitchburg and keep agriculture alive there. With the kind of rains we're having, with the high soil moisture and with the water flows that we're experiencing, that may simply become impossible, which would be a gigantic change from what Fitchburg, from what our basic assumptions have always been as to what Fitchburg was. Thank you.
Thank you. So, any questions? I have a couple of questions. So, my first question is,
Julia, sorry,
yeah.
sorry not to cut you off, but Ed Kinney also emailed.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. So, do you want me to read the whole thing? Okay.
Or as much as you would like.
Okay, so yes, I forgot about that. So, okay, so here I'm gonna read a memo that Ed Kenny, the chair of the Ag and Rural Affairs Committee, wrote to us. This is what he said. I address this recommendation to the Committee of the Whole as a private citizen. While Ag and Rural Affairs have reviewed the Lake Barney issue and discussed it in multiple occasions, the committee has not taken a position. Thus, I am not speaking on its behalf. But as a chair of the committee, I have attended virtually all the intergovernmental meetings regarding Lake Barney, and I have been following this issue closely over the past 2 to 3 years. Fitchburg staff should be commended for the work on this and their efforts to coordinate a large number of stakeholders, including Fitchburg residents and farmers, the State Department of Correction, the Federal Bureau of Fish and Wildlife, Dane County, the Town of Oregon, the Village of Oregon, Oregon landowners, Dane County, and the DNR. A solution to the Lake Barney problem in the end will be a testament to intergovernmental cooperation. My recommendation to this committee is at least for now to budget for target the 944 feet lake level alternative. My concern regarding the other alternatives are as follows. The 942 feet alternative will get the lake back to its historical level. However, number one, it is considerably more costly than the 944 feet and the 945 feet alternatives, both to build and maintain. Number two, while the DNR will likely consider both wildlife habitat and stormwater management, it is very possible that it will not prefer the 942 alternative. They may find longer-term storage at Lake Barney to be preferable to the release of additional stormwater into the Yahara River and eventually Rock River. We have recently seen the need to draw down Lake Monona more rapidly where there is a major stormwater event without exacerbating flooding downstream in places like Fort Atkinson and Janesville, which has been hit hard in the past years. The 945 level leaves a very large lake, which is problematic for both Fitchburg and Oregon. Number one, this level reduces the ability to rapidly drain water, impacting Fitchburg ag lands and rural residents compared to 944 feet or 942 feet. Second, it also provides very little excess detention capacity to protect the Village of Oregon in a major event. As it is, DNR requirements to delineate wetlands and potentially mitigate wetland disturbance are likely to drive up the village cost and will weigh heavily on their level of participation. it will make sense for the village to participate in this project by funding work within village limit and sharing upstream costs if there is a material benefit to the village. My understanding is that the difference in detention capacity from 945 feet to 944 feet is very significant. In summary, the 944 feet level may be achievable at cost only marginally higher than the 945 level land, considerably lower than the 942 feet level. It is more likely to be economically feasible and still achieve a positive outcome for both Fitchburg and Oregon, while mitigating impacts downstream on the Yahara and Rock rivers. We won't have good numbers until after the DNR has fully weighed in, but if we need a placeholder number for budgetary purposes, I recommend for now targeting the 944 level. Okay. Okay, so I have a question. Well, I have several questions, but the first one.
Julia, sorry
Yeah.
to keep on interrupting you. I saw in the chat that Rick Eilertson is also registered to speak.
Okay, where is Rick? Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't see him.
Thanks for letting me speak. I guess
Okay.
all I wanted to do really was just commend the city for taking this on. This is a really challenging issue. And I guess I was fortunate in the 11 years that I was the city's environmental engineer. We didn't. This area wasn't as bad, or at least I did not know about it as being as bad as it is. It sounds like I was not aware of some of the issues that happened from the 2008 flood that Tom and John have experienced, and obviously things got much worse after that. But I guess I just wanted to commend the city for taking this on, not just this one, but the areas along Fitchburg Road that have continued to get worse, the areas along South Sain Road. There's some, we've had Fitchburg has had some serious flooding issues, and I guess I'd also like to commend Claudia. This one in particular has been challenging just because there's so many different stakeholders and parties involved, and there's so many different reasons that people can just throw their hands up in the air and say, no, we can't do anything here. And I think between the work that Tom and John have done and hiring top-notch consultants like Nick, you've got some really good solutions for consideration, and it's obviously not an inexpensive fix to address these things, but there's some serious issues if somebody doesn't step up to the plate and address these issues. So again, I'd just like to commend you and thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. So, okay, so my question is, one is, when you show the cost of all the alternatives, this is the Fitchburg portion, or is the total cost of the project?
So the benefit, what we were showing was the breakout of the benefit to city residents, and then the cost was the total cost of the project.
The total cost, so going through the village of Oregon and all of that, the total cost, okay. Second question is, I think Nick mentioned about that there is a cost associated with wetland mitigation. Can you explain what does it mean, that wetland mitigation? I don't know what it is, so.
Sure. Basically, anytime you impact an area that's delineated as being a wetland, sometimes even if it's a short-term impact, just a construction time impact, but definitely if you basically remove that wetland or make it non-functional, you have to replace that same acreage that you impact with a multiplier. You have to purchase credits. I mean, there are a couple different routes, but typically you can purchase credits directly from a wetland mitigation bank, which are these for-profit areas where they've returned, drained wetlands that were farmed, or other places where it's kind of, not easy always, but you can kind of reestablish wetlands. And so then they sell those credits. There's a market. It's all tied to what watershed you're in. But basically you have to, buy wetland credits if you impact wetlands. And it's not just a one-to-one thing. At the very best, you're buying 1.2 acres for the 1 acre impacted, but usually it's 1.7 acres. Sometimes it's even higher. And those credits go for, in the Rock River service area in 2019, an acre of wetland credit was, I think, around $80,000. So if the ditch, like I said, it's almost guaranteed to impact some wetland right adjacent to Lake Barney, just because that's historically been wetland. It's this kind of in-between area where it's been overflowing, it's been wet. The DNR has been out there and seen wetland plants. But if it gets dry in the next year and it gets farmed again, it could change. But we wanted to be very cautious because they specifically said, we think that entire area could be wetland based on what's happened over the last several years. And so we felt like it would be kind of negligent to ignore their comments that there might be a very large amount of mitigation required.
Any other question? Okay, I'm gonna go with another one. While people are thinking for more questions. Okay, you mentioned that the Village of Oregon is doing some downstream infrastructure project. Those projects are going to be part of the solution for this project, and it's going to mitigate the cost associated with the total cost, or there are additional work that they need to do?
So the work that's happening downstream is a project that's going to be paid for entirely by the Village of Oregon. That's not something that we're involved in at all. But what's being proposed is to dig a ditch through Lerner Park, and then also have additional culverts put under Cusick and Netherwood. And basically that would improve the conveyance of water through some of the areas that are currently having flooding issues in the Village of Oregon. And that's the area where we would be sending water. So we want to make sure that those improvements are put in place before we send additional water downstream.
Okay, thank you. Tom, Claudia.
This project, I don't know, I'm guessing at it, probably started when I was first elected, maybe 4 years ago or something like that. And it became obviously a huge problem for the city with the rainfall. But it brings me to some great work that you guys have done. And it all comes with a price, though. It comes with a price to the taxpayer. It comes to the price to this entire city. What's the situation with grants? Have we applied for grants on this? I know in discussion, because I was at some of these meetings at the very beginning. Where's the grant situation on this? Have we applied for grants or anything?
So at this point, we haven't applied for grants. If we look into continuing with this project in 2023 and 2024, I know that there's some Dane County flood grant funding that has become available. And actually, I apologize. I'm actually going to correct myself. I actually did apply for that one. I almost forgot because it was such an easy application to fill out. We did not get that one. And Nick, I'm not sure. Can you remind me if there are other grants?
Can I mention something? The other day I was in a meeting, a board meeting where the Secretary of Department of Revenue, Peter Barca, did an overview of the Wisconsin budget and some of the grant relief that are coming from the federal government. And there is a lot of money coming to Wisconsin to mitigate flood issues. So I think we need to be looking for those. I don't know when that money is going to be coming, but it's part of the the last package that was approved by the Biden administration. So, so there are a lot of money for different type of grants, and especially it's going to be for flood mitigation and broadband access. So this is our two issues that we have in the city of Fitchburg, and we should be, looking and reading, and I think this is what I heard that last week, so I was like, ooh, this is exactly what we need, because if we go after working with the village of Oregon and the town of Oregon, like a group of municipality with this project, I think we are going to have more way in front of this grant, So that's it. Okay. So Gabriela has a question.
So in terms of making this decision, obviously there's the recommendation to do the 944 feet, but it sounds like the wetland aspect of it seems like a massive unknown in terms of how we make the decision. And so I guess my question is, in terms of how we move forward, the design is, we commit when we design it, and we can't figure out the wetland cost until we've done the design? Or is there some sort of in-between point where we could sort of estimate how much the wetland might cost and then thereby potentially change our choice because of that?
So that's a good question. Definitely, I would say we should do the wetland delineation prior to starting the design. That would probably be the first step. There's definitely a way to add a decision point in there. I think probably what we would do is we would get a contractor on board or a consultant on board, and maybe structure their contract so there's kind of a base part of the contract, and then there's an if directed part of the contract, and then the base part might just be doing the wetland delineation and doing a presentation to council, and then the larger part of it would be actually doing the design, and that would be the if directed piece of it. And that way, after being able to present the results of that wetland delineation and then the costs that we anticipate, then maybe that would allow council to have another decision point at that time.
Great. And so is that something that you think you would want to, you are planning to possibly move forward with? Is that something that we can ask you, request that you do that, or is that something that was already in the hopper?
Well, I guess I was thinking about that, that we would definitely want to have that piece in order to make the decision. Unfortunately, we haven't at this point gotten permission to do that wetland delineation, but I agree with you that it's a big unknown. It's a huge range. It could go from being not a huge cost to almost doubling the project cost. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to add a decision point after getting that information.
And that would be in 2023. It would have to be like right before the design, followed by the construction. So
right, and if it's possible to do that even earlier, maybe even in 2022, it really will just depend on the landowner's availability, or I guess willingness really, to allow us to do that. Then that might be something that we could do in 2022 rather than waiting to 2023.
Thank you.
Randy.
Yes, we're speaking of the design and we're speaking of 2023. Did I not hear that there are some other moving parts to this that we may not even be able to move forward, and that would be the town of Oregon? I'm just looking at a Google map. Town of Oregon and so forth. I mean, a lot of this hinges upon if they want to address this issue, and if they decide to address it, they have to move forward with their portion as well, correct?
So there are two things. So one is they would have to complete their project, which is the improvements that they're making, which is a separate project they're paying for on their own, and that's the Cusick and Lerner Park improvement. So that's kind of step one. And then step two is getting them on board to be a partner on this project. And so our project does hinge on their project be actually being permitted and being built. And then the second piece that it hinges on is, of course, them being a willing partner, which based on, just based on a lot of the benefits that they're getting, I do think that will ultimately be their decision to be a partner in this. And then the other moving parts, I suppose, are getting the easements that would be needed from the Department of Corrections, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and also Alpine Dairy. Just based on preliminary discussions, they do seem interested in the project and willing to keep discussions open about that. No hard commitments at this point for those easements, but I am very hopeful that those would go through as well, just because, as Nick kind of pointed out earlier, it really makes sense for them. This is a benefit to them. So I don't see those as being hard easements to get, but those are kind of all of the moving parts. There are a lot of different agencies involved.
Okay, you bring up the easements, and I thought I heard earlier that there was some resistance from Alpine Valley or the farm allowing us on property to take some tests. So but they are open to the idea. They're not closing us out from that discussion, correct?
Right. No. And I think that's another piece that we would also, in addition to the wetland delineation, we would want to have the easements before we go through this design as well, because we wouldn't want to design something that we would ultimately not be able to get easements for. So those are kind of the critical path things that need to happen for this to fall into place. But they are correct. They were not willing at this time to have us do the wetland delineation, but they are interested in the project.
Yeah, and I would say there's kind of a, with the wetland delineation, if we went out and did it today, they would identify a lot of wetland along that corridor. And so there's some risk to the landowner to have that on record as saying, we've got wetland all over the place, and this is going to impact future development, potentially land use. And those are typically good for 5 years. So it's, I think, as Claudia said, their hesitation to allow access wasn't, we don't like this project, we're not going to give you an easement. It was, we're a little bit hesitant because of the ramifications of having a delineation.
I understand now. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, next is Tom Clowder.
I just want to follow up on where I started. It has to do with Randy. I'm going to follow up, piggyback on him. But the fact of the matter is this project is in District 4. This project is in one of the biggest districts in the city. And when this starts in the future, I won't be here, but other alders will be here. And this is going to come with a price tag. And we need, as a city, to put pressure on our 2 county board supervisors, the state representatives, the Village of Oregon, the Town of Oregon, the DNR, Dane County in general, who likes to buy land, and they can follow it up. But there's a lot of stakeholders here. There are a lot of people at these meetings when I was in the room, and I can guarantee you, at the end of the day, they'll want to go home with their checkbook. And we can't have that. They have to come to the table and help us with this thing. Remember those words. They'll want to leave the table. I think they're really genuine when they were at these meetings. I think they want to help. But when the checkbook comes out, Oregon is going to tell you that they have other potholes to fill. So just be aware of that in the future, that as alders and as a mayor, we want to put pressure on these municipalities to help us with this project. It's a huge project, not just for Fitchburg. This thing goes quite all over Dane County in our southern border. So keep that in mind in the future, because I'll tell you, when you ask them for money, they may want to leave town. As I said, we can't have that. So somebody's going to have to take this bull by the horn and ask for money. And it's not easy, especially in these times. But this has also been a real sore for the whole city to deal with. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, my other question and concern that I have, I'm gonna follow up Tom line of thought is, you mentioned, Claudia, several times that, like the other partners or stakeholders, they are not already committed to this. It's like we are the champion of this project right now, So my question is, what happened is, I want to be optimistic that, for the benefit of the town of Oregon and the village of Oregon, they will be able to participate. But what happened is they say, you know what? No. So if this one is something that the city has to do in partnership with the other municipality to cover the cost, this is the intention to share all the costs with all the stakeholders. Or at the end of the day, the city, the other stakeholders say, you know what, we are out. Is the city committed to continue with that, or is something that we need to continue discussing? Because we are investing a lot of money in consultant right now, okay? And we are paying the bill, So my question is, how far we are gonna go with that if the stakeholder, yeah, it's a great idea, but then what Tom said, at the end of the day, when they say, show me the money, they say, we have other, issues in our own local municipality or our agency that we need to, we cannot afford this cost, so.
Let me answer that a little bit. And it has to do with, I'll give you an example. If you go down Fitchburg Road, half of that's in the city of Fitchburg, and the other half is in the town of Oregon, in the town of Verona. The cost is shared. You have to continue to put pressure. I'm not the mayor, but you have to continue to put pressure on these people and talk to them to get something done as far as cost goes. If you don't do anything, yeah, you're going to fit the bill, and the taxpayer in the city of Fitchburg are going to fit the bill. Do I think it's fair? No. Do I think we have to ask? Yes. If we don't ask, where are you going to go? I think that you're not doing your job. As alder, as mayor, as anybody who works for the city. These people that have come to the table have been great. I was at a number of these meetings, and they all talked a good game. But now we're getting down to the end of this. We're getting down in the last couple of years, in the year here, in 2 years, and the talk to them should start, as far as I'm concerned, next week. You may not get an answer right away because you might have new people on boards, new village presidents, new whoever. But the fact of the matter is, you have to ask the question. A turtle doesn't go too far if you don't stick your head out. And you know what? These have been great people coming to these meetings. And I'm going to put a lot of pressure on the county and our state representatives to tell them what we're dealing with, what we have, and give us some help. And take it from there, but it's just an idea. I would start soon. And the alder that's going to replace me, believe me, I will brief him. I will tell him what's going on. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Gabriela, you are next.
My question's a little bit more hypothetical, but let's say that we get to 2024 and this project is down in the Lake Barneys at 944 because of the mitigation. Presumably, I mean, that's a higher level than it's been historically, but this is kind of like presumably where it will be most of the time since we're looking at wetter conditions and it's probably going to be around 944. Does that lake then become like a recreation opportunity? Do the landowners on the outer edges have the opportunity to monetize that or do fishing? Or I'm not familiar with that type of thing, but is there an opportunity for some sort of economic development because of its like static lake status?
So that area is owned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So it's open to the public for recreational use. Primarily, my understanding is that folks can bike around it or walk around it. I'm not sure, Tom, do folks boat on Lake Barney?
Before it flooded, no, but they currently do now canoe on it and kayaking. So it has become somewhat of a little recreational area for the surrounding communities. So and if you look at 944 elevation, that retains a pretty big lake area. If you look at our property, 944 takes the water level to about 300 to 400 feet from our house. So it still is a big lake area if you look at that area. So to answer that question, yeah, there probably is, because you have the rotary bike trail access, you have those points at both ends of the trail. So it could be a very interesting future for that lake level at 944.
Awesome, thanks.
Any other question? I have one. So who owns the land where the lake is?
Primarily Fish and Wildlife Service. I think Department of Corrections. And Nick, do you mind bringing up that slide that shows the property owners there? So we had a map that showed that. There you go. So the parcels that are red, oops. Here we go. So the parcels that are red,
yes.
Oh, okay. Department of Corrections. For some reason, I was thinking more of it was owned by Fish and Wildlife Service. So really just a piece of it is owned by Fish and Wildlife Service. The majority is owned by Department of Corrections.
Now, Claudia, one note here is that the actual impacted area does continue to the left of the map currently shown.
Mm-hmm.
So there is more fish and wildlife area along with our property. Our property, where our house sits, is only halfway back on our property. We continue another 40 acres roughly into the Lake Barney area. And then you go over to Swan Pond. I don't know who owns Swan Pond. I'm assuming Fish and Wildlife. And in fact, I know they do because they own the land on the other side of us to the west of our property line. So I'm assuming it's all Fish and Wildlife.
Yeah, I think it is, because if you park at this little easement here to get down to the lake here, they've got their signage, and it at that sign it says Swan Pond. So I think that's kind of the general area. So I'm assuming they must have the land over on the west end too. And you're right.
Okay.
And you're right. This is the old image. So if you go out there now and you go down here on Fish and Wildlife Service, you're at the lake. It's just when it's this.
My question to you is because, this is a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. What is the commitment to participate with, because we are fixing the problem that is in the property. So what is their commitment to help us with this? Have you talked to them?
So they have been at the table. I guess that conversation has not happened. I think it would probably have to happen at a higher level than the person who has been attending our meetings to see if there was interest there. Their, I guess, general feedback has been to keep up to date on it. They did give some feedback on elevations that they saw as preferable. They weren't opposed to us draining the lake because they find that the lower lake levels have more ecological benefit and habitat than having all of the open water. So they've been at the table primarily to keep informed. I think asking them for financial contributions is certainly something that they might be interested in, and we can go down that road and ask them as well.
Yeah, the one comment I'd like to make is I think all of the stakeholders have some economic benefit to lowering the lake level, whether it's Fish and Wildlife, Department of Corrections, Alpine Dairy, Village of Oregon, or the Fitchburg residents, myself included. There's an economic benefit to everybody of lowering the lake level, so there's a incentive that they should have to participate in the solution.
Okay, and my other question is, are you planning to share this presentation with the Village of Oregon, the Town of Oregon? What happens if you go with this presentation, the study, the finding, and say, no, we don't like the 944, we like the 945 or the 942? So, what is your plan? What is your plan? I think, are you planning to show this presentation to them too?
So, so we have I shared the draft report that we received with their village engineer, just for his input as well, because he's obviously a very technical person, and I want to make sure he also agrees with the findings. He only had stellar things to say and had pretty much just a couple of typos, which he fixed. And we both agreed that 944 seemed like the obvious solution. So I think it would be very unlikely that they would, at this point, select something else as the recommended alternative, since we seem to be on the same page with that. My feeling is that the more people that have access to this information, the better, because then they can make more informed decisions for the village as well. I think one of the big benefits of this study has been to quantify the benefits that the Village of Oregon will see. Not only the costs for the Rotary Trail and other things like that, but also there has been quantification of the rate control that will be, and we didn't get into that today since it doesn't really impact the city, but the report goes into more detail on the rate control benefits that the Village of Oregon will see. And I think that this study will have some good impact, some helpful information for them, and hopefully make it a little bit more influential that they should be a partner in this.
Yeah, but I want to tell you, my recommendation is, it's great that you talk to the technical guy there, but he's not going to he doesn't have any power or or decision to make it happen. So you need to present this to the village board, because they are the one who's going to vote, and they're going to decide if they're going to make this project in the budget, on the CIP, or whatever they have. But I think they need to, the board, I think there is a board, what they call the village board. I think they need to know about this, the two, the town and the village, you know what I mean? Because
so Jeff Rao, who's their DPW, I forget his exact title, he's their city engineer. He did request just of me if we would give permission for EOR to present this same finding, the same presentation to their village board. And we said, go ahead. So he is doing a separate contract with Nick to have this information presented to them as well.
Okay, no, it's good, yeah. Any other question? No? Okay, so thank you very much. I think this is great discussion, and I think we need to. It will be great if we can work on the wetland delineation project. What do you need from us, Claudia? If who has to authorize that?
So it would be in the CIP for next year. So it would be something that I would put into the proposed CIP, and then it would go through the approval budget, the approval process, and then ultimate authorization would be needed from the landowner.
Okay. So thank you very much. Great presentation. Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Tom and Rick, and I don't remember the other person, but So now, so our next committee, next committee meeting, our next meeting will be April 28th. And I need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Let me down for a second.
Aye.
Aye.
Carries. So we are adjourned. Thank you very much.